XCity Plus. New technology is changing the face of the media. In the next few years, journalism will be taking to the skies, creating new realities and turning robots into reporters.
This podcast series will be delving into the evolving world of media tech.
I'm Gemma Slingo.
And I'm Catherine Kennedy.
And today we're talking to Charles Miller, former BBC producer, writer at CoinGeek and tech enthusiast.
So thank you, Charles, for joining us.
Well, thank you.
We wanted to start by asking, how do you think changing technology has impacted the media in recent years?
Well, it's in sort of so many ways, it's difficult to know where to start really, but I think the overall effect is that everything technological has got faster, cheaper and sort of easier to use. So if you go back a few years, for instance, well, actually quite a large number of years, if you wanted to go out filming for a TV programme, you'd have a film crew, several people, it'd be very expensive, cameras would be 40,000 quid or whatever. And that has gradually all got cheaper and easier to use, so that now self-shooting for documentaries or whatever is absolutely standard. And even now, though people have been self-shooting for quite a few years, the kit that you can use is more sophisticated. So you might use a DSLR camera now, which actually looks pretty good, but it's really just a stills camera that's being used for video. So in all ways, you get a better result more cheaply, and it looks more professional than it sort of has any right to, really.
And we've maybe touched on this a little bit, but looking forward into the future, is there any particular piece of tech that you think is really exciting for journalism or that could feed into it?
Everything is changing, and it's all changing in the same direction, which is that it's getting cheaper and easier to use, and that the sort of borderline between what a professional can produce and somebody who's just doing it for fun can produce is becoming more and more difficult to identify the whole time.
So, thinking more specifically, virtual reality seems to be attracting a lot of attention recently. Could you briefly tell us what virtual reality actually is?
VR is a complete world that is, well, yes, I would say is completely simulated. It's computer graphics, basically. You put it on, you can't see anything. You're in a new world when you've got the headset on. The key word is immersive. That you put on the headset, you are cut off in a way from the world, both visually and in terms of sound. Augmented reality is slightly different because it's a sort of halfway house. But that is both the strength and the weakness of VR, because it's quite hard to find actual situations in which a person wants to be kind of cut off like that. You don't know that somebody's not making funny faces behind you or doing what's going on in the room that you're in, you know. So I think that's what sort of held it back a bit. There was this idea early on that the thing that was going to sort of really bring VR into factual work was the idea of empathy, that you were going to be able to place the audience in a situation where they would get a feel for a refugee camp or whatever it would be that was quite different. I'm not sure that has really proved to be the case, or at least whether there's really a market for that, at least. The technology is developing the whole time, and so we've gone from the original VR kit would cost a few hundred quid, maybe between 500 and 1,000 quid or something, with a special computer. Now Oculus is going from the Oculus Go, which was like $200 or something, and I think there's going to be a new one any time now, the Quest, which is going to be a bit more expensive, but actually a lot better, I think. And when you've got that on and you can actually move in the virtual world, then that'll create a whole new sort of set of opportunities, I suppose.
So at the moment, you would sit in a room with this headset on and it's like you're in that environment so you can see and hear it. Is that what virtual reality set does?
Yes, exactly. There are different levels of sophistication in the technology. I mean, the simplest thing is, where you can put your phone into this Google Cardboard headset, and then really it's just a sort of 360 view, so that if you look left or right, and you can even sort of get the equivalent of that on a laptop if you go onto YouTube and it's got those sort of arrows and you can look all the way around. But then you can go from that to a slightly more sophisticated thing where the headset sort of knows when you are moving backwards and forwards, and that gives it a much more realistic kind of feel. But people making VR have a sort of a problem, I think, because when you make a movie, you are sort of, the viewer is kind of watching the scene, and there are cuts between shots. But if I cut from a sort of close-up to a wide shot, the person watching doesn't think, oh, I've just jumped from the side of the table to, 10 foot away in the room, because you don't sort of identify with what you're seeing as being what you'd see through your own eyes. Whereas in a virtual reality environment, you do, pretty much. It's sort of halfway between a movie and a video game in that respect, because in a video game you're not just watching something, you are the controlling force behind what you're seeing. And I think one of the things that will sort of be able to move VR forward is if people can kind of accept a kind of grammar of how VR works. Are you a person looking through sort of the eyes of the person in the VR scene, or are you just the observer as you are in a movie? And that's the confusion that is sort of unresolved at the moment. But probably in 20 or 30 years' time, when we look back, it'll look very quaint that we didn't understand that this is the way you should think of it,
And is there a sense now of which way it should go between those two things?
I think there's sort of, in a way, there's a kind of debate about it, I think, at the moment. There are people who would like VR to be a more experiential medium, like video games, where what happens is determined by what you decide. And there are people who want to make it more like a movie, where you just sort of sit back. I mean, you can look around, but you sort of sit back, relax, and it'll unfold. The story will unfold in front of you. Obviously, in a very visceral kind of way, because you've got the VR, but you're not asked to be a player in the story,
Your point about empathy, I thought, was quite striking. I don't know, it seems quite strange that you would be seeing, for example, a refugee camp or a war zone as if you were in some sort of video game.
Actually, it's not really like a video game. It's more, you're just plonked down in a tent or something, and just stuff is going on. I mean, really, this is 360 video rather than VR. There's a sort of overlap there, but if you stick a 360 camera somewhere, and then it's just recording, and then you watch it through a VR headset, the viewer can choose sort of where you want to look all the way around, just like you can in real life kind of thing. And the idea really is that ordinary life continues as recorded on the 360 camera, and so you're not being told a story by a reporter or something, or sort of taken through it. You're just sitting there and sort of absorbing the atmosphere. And so I think there is something in that, because 360 video is good for that, but it's not particularly good for things where you're trying to tell a very tightly cut story, because you don't want to be making cuts the whole time as you would on an ordinary film. It just doesn't work very well, because you want the person to have a chance to sort of appreciate the environment that they're in. And of course, as the program maker, you don't know which direction the person is going to be looking in. So, there is a danger that something critical is happening in one direction, but half the audience happens to be looking over their shoulder at that point. So you've sort of lost control over the viewer compared to conventional filmmaking.
And with all those different ways of kind of reporting news, there is obviously a lot of potential for VR. And do you feel as if, do journalists generally know how to use it? Is it understood and used well, or is there more scope for that?
I think that VR perhaps produced kind of quite a lot of interest maybe a couple of years ago. My feeling, I'm not really sure about this, but I slightly feel that it's gone off the boil, and that, the sort of early adopters were terribly keen, and the New York Times was putting out VR every day, and here's a cardboard headset to watch it through. And I sort of feel like that didn't really progress to where they probably expect it to by now. And probably we just need the technology to be that much better and that much cheaper before it's going to get widespread adoption, I would say. That's just my guess.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Charles. That's been really interesting. We'll look forward to seeing how your predictions turn out. And you can join us next time for an episode on artificial intelligence.
XCity Plus.